My name is Dr. Ryan Holsapple, and today I'm going to talk to you about Sean Carroll, who's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. And he did an interview with Robert Lawrence Kuhn on Kuhn's YouTube channel, Closer to Truth, which is also a PBS TV show. And this video is a great exploration of just how wonky the problems of consciousness can get in terms of cross talk between disciplines and between consciousness philosophers. I have a very explicit bias about what consciousness is. I do not think consciousness emerged from material reality. Now, it's not a bias in the sense of some blind faith that I have that consciousness is somehow magical. I just legitimately believe it makes more sense to think of consciousness as prior to matter. But we'll get into that as this reaction video progresses. Now let's start with the video and see how I react.
Sean, consciousness has been one of my focuses in neuroscience because I wanted to try to understand conscious reality. I know you're a radical physicalist, so how do you deal with consciousness?
Physicalism is the belief that consciousness utterly depends on physical reality. It used to be known as materialism, but as modern science progressed, we changed it to the name physicalism.
I think that consciousness is a way of talking about the physical world, just like many other ways of talking. It's one of these emergent phenomena that we find is a useful way of packaging reality. So we say that someone is conscious of something that corresponds to certain physical actions in the real world. I don't think that there is anything special about mental properties. I don't think there's any special mental realm of existence. I think it's all the physical world in all the manifold ways we have of describing it.
Okay, give me another example of an emergent phenomenon.
Well, the classic example of an emergent phenomenon is the fluid description of the air around us. The fact that even though it's made of discrete particles, atoms and molecules, we talk about it as a continuum with a pressure and a temperature and stuff like that. It's a macroscopic, coarse-grained view.
Great example. The wetness of water would be something similar. Okay. Now, I would believe consciousness is qualitatively different from that because there is something that is like to have the feelings that I'm seeing. Phenomenology of this is radical difference from the wetness of water from individual molecules or the fluidity of air.
Right.
So essentially, Sean, Dr. Carroll is making a category mistake by conflating mental and material metaphors.
And you must disagree with that.
I do disagree with that. I think there's an irreducibility, but it's not in the reality. It's in how people talk to each other about it.
But you see it, you live it, you feel it.
That's right. And I can describe it in physical terms perfectly well. When you say, like, I now have experienced the redness of red, I think that is a set of words that can be mapped on in a very direct way to certain physical things happening in my brain.
So the redness of red is a classical example of what is called qualia in consciousness studies. Qualia are isolated phenomenological experiences that are used as thought exercises to reflect on what is the nature of consciousness. So the idea of the redness of red or the taste of coffee or the view of a sunset, these are all called qualia because we're trying to isolate experiences of consciousness. And it's often used as a thought experiment where you look at that and you say, now find that in the brain. So somebody who is more of a materialist would say, well, we just don't know how to explain it yet, but the neuroscience will reveal the redness of red in the brain. But somebody who challenges that is more likely to say, no matter how much we know about the brain, we're never going to see the redness of red in the brain. We're never going to be able to look at the brain and say, oh, there's the feeling of getting a kiss on the cheek from your wife. So we have this fundamental problem of the separation between objective descriptions and subjective experiences. And that's what David Chalmers coined the hard problem of consciousness. And the hard problem of consciousness essentially says, look, let's say there was a being that had all the same physical features of you and had all the same neurological underpinnings as you, the same biochemistry, everything's exactly the same history, the same experiences. Now, presumably, under physicalism, under materialism, there's nothing implicitly that makes us have to believe that that thing is conscious. In essence, presumably, this person could go on acting the same way you act, doing the same things you do, carrying on their relationships, carrying on their work. And there's no reason we should assume they're conscious under materialism. This is called the philosophical zombies thought experiment. And so the idea of this thought experiment is to show the problem with materialism is that no matter how many correlations you pile up on top of one another, it doesn't give you the experience of consciousness. It doesn't give you qualia. It only gives you more objective criteria. So it's basically just saying, okay, let's assume materialism's true. Let me create a clone of you, and they will do all the same things you do, but we will have no reason to believe that they're conscious because you haven't explained consciousness at all in materialism. You've simply assumed that it's explained.
Nobody doubts that.
And I think that's all there is.
At least among my friends, nobody doubts that.
When you talk about the existence of a cat, this is a category that is not to be found in the fundamental laws of physics. A cat, a game of basketball is not to be found. These are useful categories for describing the world. I think that consciousness, self-awareness, experience, inner subjectivity, useful categories for describing the world.
Now,
this doesn't really make sense. He's not explaining anything here. He's saying that there's nothing in physics that explains a cat, as an emergent property of the universe, but that we accept it because it's a useful way of describing the world, as opposed to, I guess, describing a cat in terms of its atomic complexity. But he's not explaining consciousness. He's just shoving it away. So there's no work being done here. He's just saying that consciousness is a way of describing the world. It doesn't explain anything. It just smuggles away the problem.
But some physicists see consciousness as sitting below wave function, not just part of the wave, but actually sitting below it as the most fundamental thing.
Some physicists deny global warming. I think that some physicists is not a very good beginning to almost any sentence.
Okay, all right. But with consciousness, one philosopher has said that consciousness is an output of the brain like urine is the output of the kidneys. Is that something you would subscribe to?
No, I don't. I'm not sure I would use that exact metaphor. Again, I think it's a very, very useful construct at a higher level of description, right? I can't imagine doing without consciousness as a way of talking about the world. I know what it means when people say, I'm conscious of this. I know what it's like to be that. These are real ways of describing the underlying
When you're saying I'm
reality.
conscious of it, that's sort of a...
What I see, sorry to interrupt Dr. Kuhn here, but what frustrates me about what Sean is saying, he's not explaining anything. Consciousness is a way of describing reality. What reality? Describing what? Whose reality? What are we describing reality for? If there's no subjectivity to be explained, what are we describing? Pure objectivity? Then where are you? Who are you? What are you? Are you an existent being? And he tries to argue that he himself is just a sequence of experiences, kind of like a David Hume empiricism argument, where it's like all you can experience is the moment-to-moment fluctuation of sense impressions, and your identity is ever changing every second. But it doesn't explain anything. It just says that consciousness doesn't need to be explained because it's just a way of describing the world. But it just begs the question, what world? Whose world? For what reason are we describing the world? If there's no consciousness that's underlying these things, if there's no subjectivity to be explained as an actual problem in your materialist worldview, then what are we describing things for? Consciousness as a way of describing what? It's very problematic what he's doing.
An English locution that means I'm aware of something, but you could be conscious or aware of something in a mechanical or zombie-like way in terms of behavioral reaction. But I'm talking about the phenomena that we all feel seems so radically different from anything that you see in the brain. I dealt with that. You deal with the probing of electrodes and electrochemistry and the genetic expressions. Do you believe that phenomenon phenomenology of what we see is an identical theory sense to descriptions like the morning star and the evening star is the same.
Yes, that's right.
Is Venus is the same thing. I just call it by different.
Absolutely. And I think that actually, to me, zombies, the idea of the philosophical zombie, something that acts in exactly the same way as a conscious creature, but just lacks the consciousness, lacks that inner subjective experience, is a great argument for my position, in the sense that it's very hard to really take self-consistently this idea of a philosophical zombie, because if you met a zombie, you ask them, what are you experiencing right now? They would tell you exactly the same that a regular person would say.
Right.
And you say, well, at least I know I'm not a zombie. Do you really know that? Of course, you're telling yourself you're not a zombie, you're experiencing, but so a zombie would say they're not a zombie. I think that there's really no way of boiling that thought down.
Really? You going to deny subjective experience? I mean, do you really know that you're experiencing something? Yeah, I'm experiencing it. It's happening. Thing about experience is no matter what it is, it's happening. So regardless of whether the experience is an illusion or is at a different layer of reality, you could argue we're all living in a simulation, we're in the matrix, whatever you want to say, but we can't deny that something is happening that is being experienced. So for him to say that a philosophical zombie would think that it's experiencing something misunderstands the whole experiment of the philosophical zombie. The whole point of the zombie is that it's not experiencing anything, whereas you are. So to say he thinks he's experiencing something gives him a phenomenological character, which means that Sean fundamentally doesn't understand thought experiment, or he doesn't want to understand it.
To a consistent holding of the idea there could be something that physically acts exactly like me, yet lacks this important element of
The zombie
consciousness.
would say that I'm not a zombie and describe the inner feelings, but would still be a zombie.
That is proposal, and I'm just pointing out how silly it begins to sound, because they would be sincere.
Look, I think anything.
Sincerity, again, presupposes experience. They would be sincere. So he's not explaining anything. He's just placing consciousness there when the whole point of the experiment is that consciousness isn't there.
I think they're experiencing it.
They would think they're experiencing it.
Really
Why
say
would
that
they
there's.
lie? That's right. And the difference between me and someone who thinks that there is something phenomenologically different about consciousness is that is all there is.
So,
obviously Sean he's being a little cute here. He's basically saying that all there is objective properties, and he's trying to explain away consciousness. Sean, he surely must know that he's not engaging the philosophical zombie argument at its actual level of thought. He's just merely surpassing it with his own position without really solving it. It seems like he's aware of that.
Implication of your view, I think you have to be 100% sure that at some time in the future with future technologies, some people would say 20 or 100 years, some people may say 1,000 years, you would be able to upload your individual first-person consciousness to another medium, whether it's non-biological or another person. You would have to be 100% sure of that.
Well, I'm not 100%
Why
sure of
wouldn't you be?
anything in the world. I'm not 100% sure that the universe...
Your presupposition as a radical physicalist to consciousness, that's the given.
Yeah, I think the way that I'm happy to say it is, I see nothing special about an organic human being that could not be duplicated to arbitrary.
Or if there were something, then you could just duplicate it in an organic human. You could create a human being.
We all know there are thought experiments, so we do believe, most people believe, that I could take out one neuron from my brain.
All right, no, we've been
replace
through
it
that.
with an electronic thing, and
right.
then I'm still just as conscious.
Right.
What happens when I take out two? And to me, that's not even an issue. Like, yeah, sure, just as conscious all the way down.
Okay, so you go all the way down and you put 100 billion and then one neurons in every neuron, every connection, every reaction, that you will have noticed no difference during the whole process.
Yes.
Okay, so take that one step further, that every time I put that neuron in, we both agreed it was a perfect replication, I made two of them and I put one over here.
Yeah.
And then I made another, and when I got to the 100 billion, and you haven't felt any difference.
Right.
I have 100 billion of Sean right here.
That's right.
And so now where's the consciousness? Where's the first person?
There's two conscious things.
There's two conscious things. Yeah. But that's not your consciousness here.
No, well, if I'm the one here, that's another one.
What do you mean? So then
it's just like the branching of the function of the universe. There's now two copies of me that go their own ways.
But you have no awareness of this one.
That one has its own awareness. I have my own awareness. Right.
And you have it's not like you have a shared consciousness.
No, certainly not.
Right. You don't have a fractional consciousness.
Right.
So this is going into, this is like your twin.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's not you.
No, that's a copy.
So then
There's
how?
two copies now.
Okay. So
I mean, Robert's basically saying here, what makes you you, if you're simply just going to reduce yourself to identical with your neurochemical makeup, then if you were cloned, essentially you have a location problem where there's two yous, but neither of them are really subjectively hefty. There's no underlying ontological force behind you-ness. It's merely it merely disappears and is just a branching off of different particle collections. But Sean has no problem with this because he doesn't believe that you-ness even really exists. So in essence, he's basically arguing that personhood is an illusion, as far as I can tell.
ship of theses.
Right. But the point is that if you want to sort of really get down to what the identity is, at every moment of time, there's a different thing, right? There's a different configuration of stuff. There's this configuration of stuff at this moment of time, this configuration of stuff at this moment of time. If you're reifying the idea that there is some unified flow of conscious experience through time, I'm going to deny that.
Oh, yeah.
Again, this goes way back to David Hume. So there's a lot of philosophical presuppositions in what Sean is saying. The idea that every moment is a sort of happenstance, bubbling up of sensory experiences, but there's no underlying identity or selfhood.
Following what follows from your analysis that consciousness.
This is where he just totally shoots himself in the foot. This whole time he's grilling Kuhn about you-ness. It doesn't exist. You can't use it. But then all of a sudden he steps outside of it and says, well, it's very important to me. It's very important to me. So he can't even live by the very presuppositions he's arguing under, which means that it's essentially a broken philosophy. I mean, come on. If it doesn't apply to your life in terms of coherence, because whatever is a true philosophy, it means that it maps on to multiple layers of reality at once. That if we want a true theory of consciousness, it's going to work well in biology, it's going to work well in psychology, it's going to work well in philosophy. It's going to have multiple modes, multiple means in which it converges onto reality as such. It's not going to be incompatible or incoherent. And Sean here just completely invalidates the last 15 minutes of argument in such a way that is so funny to me. And he doesn't even admit it. He doesn't even realize it. It goes completely...
The contingent accident of what happened here at some point.
Depends what you mean by important. It's very important to me. It's as important as cats and baseballs and so forth. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a very useful way to think about what happens in our world.
Pragmatism. It's very useful. It's very useful. Useful to who? You don't exist. There's no one for it to be useful to, Sean. There's no such thing as usefulness. It's all an illusion. Oh, man. Consciousness debates do not cease to amaze me in terms of the mental gymnastics that people will do to try to get out of the fact that we can't explain consciousness by reducing it to materialism. We need something more. And right now, that's what I'm working on for my research. I'm writing a paper on consciousness and looking at all the ways in which we try to discuss this problem and all the underlying assumptions which are embedded within it, and even the different definitions that we're using when we're talking about the word consciousness. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this longer video. Please do subscribe and follow along and like and leave a comment and share if you're interested in my content, and I'll continue to share more. Thank you.